28 seconds.
27.
26.
25 seconds.
24. 23.
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
20 seconds.
19.
18. 17 seconds.
16.
15 seconds.
14.
13 seconds.
12. 11.
10 seconds. 9.
8. 7. 6. Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Subspace Chatter, the show where we boldly go into discussing Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Today we'll be discussing the third episode of the new series called Ghosts of Illyria. My name is Vanessa, and I have a YouTube channel called I Love Bad Star Trek. If everybody else wants to introduce themselves, starting with Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan, a long-time fan of Star Trek, chief editor of the website warpfactortrack.com, and I guess admin a long time ago for like 6 years on Memory Alpha, stuff like that. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Brad?
Hi. Sorry.
Oh, right.
Oh no. Hi. Sorry. I'm Marcelo. I'm a screenplay writer, a podcaster, and a YouTuber.
And hi, I'm Brad, and I have no. I'm a longtime fan of Star Trek. I have no online presence, no YouTube, no blogs, nothing. Just me and the thoughts I'm going to share today.
Great. There was a lot to unpack in this particular episode of Star Trek. So we'll get started with the questions that we collated. First off, do you agree with Una's decision regarding M'Benga at the end? This is regarding the decision for M'Benga to remain on the Enterprise after endangering the crew. My thought is that this was a career-ending action, that he has remained on the Enterprise by the skin of his teeth. And the reasoning has to do with Una sort of asking M'Benga to not reveal her secret of being Illyrian to Starfleet in exchange for not talking about the kid in the transporter. What are your thoughts?
I really thought that Una was very, very light on M'Benga, and the fact that she really gave him another way to keep his daughter alive, I thought she should have forced him to basically take his daughter out of the pattern buffer and say goodbye to her, and then I would have thrown him in the brig for like 6 months. I wouldn't have necessarily thrown him off the ship because he is one of the best doctors in Starfleet at this point, but I would have made him feel dire consequences for putting the whole crew at risk. And don't you tell me that you had no idea what was happening. Don't you tell me that. You are a lot smarter than that, sir. So I expected better from Dr. M'Benga in that aspect. I didn't really feel that Dr. M'Benga knew that number one was an Illyrian, so I don't think that he sort of used that against her to sort of better his position. I didn't read that at all, but those are my thoughts on that specific scene.
Just like I thought that it was her Illyrianism that made her immune to the thing and sort of like helped them come up with a solution. That's sort of, anyway, I just wanted to put that in there. What are your guys' thoughts about the decision that she made? Brett, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Okay now?
Yeah.
I think some of the themes of the show are forgiveness and perception or perspective and trust. You know, these are things that popped up in the episode. And I think that that Una's choice to allow Mbenga's kind of transgression to slide. I thought that, while fitting for the idea of forgiveness, did seem a little bit light, considering, right, the impact on the show, or on the crew. And that led me to wonder about this whole idea of, you know, relationship and power and, you know, privilege. If this had been any other Doctor who was just a secondary character, would they have given, or they had extended the same kind of treatment to? If this was a lower decks, you know, ensign, or you know, someone who'd been in the lower decks and kind of the underbelly of the ship, would they have been treated with as light a touch, right? So while I appreciated it in context of the story and this whole idea of forgiveness, and he's not a bad guy, he just made a bad choice and all that, in the context of the impact on the crew, I do think it was kind of light. But it opens up a whole can of worms as well.
I think that like the scene that's just before that, basically, where it's like Una with Pike, like Pike clearly makes it clear that he'll go to bat for her. So I think she may be keeping that in mind in the scene afterwards, where they're like keeping it
Right, definitely paying
secret.
it forward.
And also, like, it reminds me of the creator of the transporter, Emery Erickson, and it's really like, it's just like expected to an extent that things like that can happen, where they've got like a family member stuck in the transporter buffer.
All right.
Yeah, Brad.
Moving on. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that even that scene with number one and Pike just before the Mbenga scene, right? I mean, I get why they did it, and I get why there's forgiveness and understanding and all of that, and this whole idea of this interpersonal relationship shouldn't be superseded by rules and regulations. But rules and regulations are there to help guide the progress, right, of these interpersonal relationships, and the not just the success of us two or us four people or a small community, but the larger body, the larger entity, right? Everyone's going to play by the same rules. And I thought that the forgiveness that Pike, well, not really forgiven, but acceptance and willingness to flaunt the policy in favor of helping number one was, again, a little bit, you know, spoke to a little bit of privilege and a little bit of power. And would it have been extended with the same courtesy being extended, or the same opportunity being given to someone who wasn't a close personal friend and he'd worked with for years, right?
Exactly. I thought that there was a bit of a prioritization of friendship over safety and just protocol having to do with the rest of the crew. Sort of dovetailing into that, let's see.
And there's also a little bit of the, you know, just because you're useful, just because you're the best damn, you know, first officer in the fleet, we'll overlook the years of lying and that you're an illegal member of Starfleet, and you know, no big deal. You know, your character flaw, whatever.
Yeah.
So, okay, go ahead, Marcel.
Oh, I'm sorry. I really connected with Una's plight, with her sort of hiding the fact that she is a genetically engineered person, because as a disabled individual, I spent years and years of my life hiding my true self from people that I love and my friends, because I thought if I really showed them who I was and if I really told them everything, they would cast me out and they would and they would look at me like a leper. They wouldn't look at me the same way. They would look at me differently. And although she did break the rules, she did lie, she didn't discipline Mbanga, I understood where she was coming from with me having um with me being able to level with her in that manner, you know.
So dovetailing into that, do you think the line about occasionally having to rematerialize people who are kept in the transporter buffer contradicts TNG's relics?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I think that all Star Trek is pliable. So you shouldn't take anything that you see at any point in Star Trek too seriously, because Star Trek contradicts itself all the time. So I don't really think it's necessarily. I don't think this episode necessarily contradicts TNG's relics, although it might.
I agree with that. You reminded me of like even from like the basically the pilot, one of the pilots of TOS, Where No Man Has Gone Before, is called like James R. Kirk, and like we know so many other Star Trek productions call him James T. Kirk. So yeah, it's just like contradictions and stuff like that have been existing in Star Trek from the very beginning. But also, like, it occurred to me that maybe it's just like a different stage in development of the transporter. That like the earlier transporters, like this in Strange New Worlds, you need to keep rematerializing the person. Maybe by the time of basically the movie, the TOS movie era, where Scotty is stuck in the transporter buffer in the USS Nolan, it's obviously a later transporter, and maybe you don't need to, well, I think it does establish that you don't need to, but I don't think that's a contradiction, like you said.
Well, and I think they get around that by saying as long as you rematerialize them regularly, right? So you're not taxing the system, you don't cause glitches in the matrix, I guess, if you will, right? With I think in the later properties they were referring to long-term storage of energy of the patterns, right? We're not talking about every month, maybe, or every 2 weeks or whatever Mamenga is doing, but maybe it's every a year. That's when we start seeing issues, right?
But it also occurred to maybe that's an untruth, where like, because he's so emotionally, eager to see his daughter and stuff like that. Like, if it was, well, it wouldn't be questioned if he said, like, it needs to happen. She's rematerialized occasionally. Like, if Una encountered her later, but then again, I guess she could just like look that information up if she doesn't know it already or whatever. So I don't think it's that. But
well, and it also sets up possible storyline where, they've got this Illyria, they've got this technology, they've got a character who's suffering because of the pain of his daughter, and they need a new discovery. Are they going to revisit this and wrestle with the ethical conundrum later?
I think as well, like, because fans seem to be like considering this a filler episode for the most part. I was thinking to myself while watching it, like, if Strange New World is wise and does the wise thing, I would think that they will harken back to both Mbanga's daughter and that situation with Una and Pike, where there's a secret kept, and that could potentially bring them in conflict with Starfleet. So there's continuing threats. So
next question. Do you think Pike's hair looked more manageable this week's episode than last week's?
Yes.
I'm glad.
Who came up with that question?
I asked that question.
That hair was reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that hair was better. I'll just say better. I wouldn't necessarily say reasonable. I'll just say better.
You can't reason with me.
Uh, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Uhura's Durag Starfleet issued. This is a really big deal because typically when folks with different textured hair go to sleep on TV shows, they usually don't wear any sort of head covering, and that has alienated a certain section of the watching audience because that's just part of that culture. And to keep moisture and styles locked in and everything. So the fact that they not only included it, but that it's a Starfleet issue, so it's like a very deliberate choice, I think is extremely important for inclusivity and a big step forward. And I was really glad to see that.
Yeah, that was a good choice.
You know what really bugs me, and I don't know how the panel feels on this issue, but I don't like the fact that in Kurtzman era Star Trek, there has to be deltas on every single thing. Like there's deltas on pillows. I'm like, guys, why are we branding everything? We don't need to brand everything. We could just brand a couple things, but we don't have to brand everything. I'm sorry, this is just me whining.
I just know from a cosplay perspective, it just makes duplicating the thing kind of impossible because, I see it from that perspective.
Oh, okay.
Is the way genetic engineering regarded canonically consistent with the rest of the franchise as it is in here?
I found it really odd that Una and La'an had that conversation about Khan when they shouldn't know who Khan is. I mean, Khan doesn't come into Star Trek continuity until Space Seed in the original series. So the fact that they mentioned that her ancestor, I believe it was Khan Union Singh, really bugged the crap out of me. And that's saying something because I'm a Star Trek fan who doesn't give two left fingers about Star Trek continuity. So for that to bug me, I don't know what it was about that, but I thought that was completely unnecessary.
Well, but go ahead, Dan.
I disagree. I think not only have you got in Space Seed like Spock looking it up in the library computer, like the information's clearly there about eugenics wars and Khan and all the rest of it, but we just had the folder that that's at the end of Picard season 2 as well.
Right.
Yeah, I thought this was forward-facing information. So this was a descendant talking about the impact on her life of a an ancestor who was very well known and very famous and vilified by people on Earth, right? And this is why there might be a founding principle of non-genetically modified people, or that technology, or that that medical kind of interventions, let's say, within the Federation. I thought this was her looking back from her childhood and the stories that were told to her and her family, probably dealing with this stuff throughout history. But why they didn't change their last name, as it would have been, popular even today. People would have done that to get away from the stigma of, or the stink of the fame or the infamy, right? But I honestly, that really didn't bug me too much. I saw it as her recollecting of what happened from the past. What I really got, what I just found it was odd timing to have some of that exposition during the fight sequence. I mean, come on, that's she's got no presence of, she's so burning with desire for light that she wants to blow up the warp core, and yet she takes the time to talk about her trauma.
I think the reason why she did that is because she wouldn't necessarily do that. I don't think Lon would necessarily do that when she's in her right mind. I think that she has to be really, really pissed off and really, really heightened and really, really go through something to admit that. So with that being said, the fact that she wants to make love to the warp core and, you know, just blow up everything really made sense to me. You know, I'm with you. I'm with you in that it was a little strange and it was a little odd, but that kind of made sense to me just a little bit.
I thought it was cool that they used. I thought it was cool that they used the term augments, harkening back to the Enterprise trilogy, with Cold Station 12, Borderland, and
it seems like.
But also, sorry, I can't remember what I was going to say. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, doesn't it seem like the writers are paying, or the showrunners are paying a little more attention to the details of language and terminology, and, you know, looking at inclusivity, right? Those little touches about, you know, costume or fashion, or they're being a little bit more mindful than perhaps, say, earlier series.
Yeah, I do think that that the writers' room in Strange New Worlds is a little bit more mindful of continuity and mindful of little touches like this. Not to say that the writers on Picard or the writers on Discovery or the writers on Lower Decks, for that matter, because I do think, as far as Star Trek writing rooms are concerned, the writers from Lower Decks are unbelievable. Those people deserve all the awards. But I do think that the writers from Strange New Worlds are a little bit more detailed oriented with the things that they put into these scripts.
I can see where you're coming from. I remembered what I was going to say, which was like, I was glad that there was so much aspects which I feel are harken back to Enterprise, because I think that's a series that doesn't get much love in continuity a lot of times. Although, well, they've already had like the USS Archer in the first episode of Strange New Worlds and stuff like that. But yeah, in this episode, I think the jackets. A lot of people have been saying that the away team, or landing party, as they call it in this episode, the jackets that they wear are like an update of the Cage jackets. But it reminds me of the jackets that were used for the away teams in Enterprise, and also obviously the Illyrians are from Enterprise, the Augments are from Enterprise. I thought that was cool to have so many aspects.
Well, keeping with that theme, I noticed today that in the shot, I mean, I rewatched Damages as well, Vanessa. So I noticed the intro, that song that plays, and then one of the last images of the intro is that planetary body, right? That's covering the top, say the top half of the top 2/3 of the screen, as I think the Enterprise or the Enterprise flashes across the screen. That has the same look as the ending of that the sequence for Strange New Worlds, where the three planetary bodies are converging. So it seems to me like that there's a connection between those intros and the way the visual elements tie in. So it's not just the writing, it's not just the elements within the story itself, but even some of the visual elements from the title seem to be similar to me.
Yeah, even like not just the Illyrians, that they basically called the same thing, although they're arguably very different. But like when you see them and they're like golden or yellow, like they were reminding me of the wisps that are appearing in an Enterprise episode as well. They're also like non-corporeal. There's quite a few aspects.
So what did you think of how the ion storm was portrayed, and B, the pacing of the storytelling?
I thought the ions, I really liked the way that the ion storm was portrayed in this episode. I really liked the sort of twist that the people that the crew were trying to find were the ion storm. I really like the fact that the Illyrians wanted to become part of Starfleet so much that they decided that they were going to take away everything special that they had in their that they decided to take away everything special about them just because they wanted to become a part of the Federation so bad. But in doing that, they became these lightning storm dragon sort of things. And just one quick note about the pacing. I thought the pacing in this episode was a little bit better than last week. It wasn't as great. I would have wanted it just a little bit faster, but the pacing was all right. It was all right. It was all right.
I thought like the ion storm, we hear about it so much on Star Trek, like as a reason that the transporters don't work. So like finally seeing like a visual of how devastating an ion storm is was really cool. And also, yeah, that was really nice. As far as like the pacing, I thought the whole thing with M'Benga and his daughter could have been its own episode. I felt like it was a little tacked on to the end. Yeah, it felt like it needed a little more room to breathe, personally.
Also, I just want to say that I've had like I was here I was here last weekend, and I've said that one of my big problems in the series so far is the way that backstory is told to us, and I really liked how number one's backstory in this episode was organically added in, and how it affected the main plot of the episode. I really appreciated that.
I really like how the Iron Storm was portrayed as well. But to me, a lot of the episode seems quite padded. I was thinking there's quite a few. I think there's quite a few lines and events that happen and stuff like that that to me just like feels superfluous to the plot. And there's like one particular, like all like the where you see like number one, she makes she records a log entry and then deletes it all. Like, what is the point of that? To me, it doesn't make much point. But there's also a particular line where she says, "Heroes, one of the good ones," and I'm like, what other kind of heroes do you get?
Well, Dan, I think the reason she erased the log is because even her personal logs can be called up for in legal issues or for legal things. So if there's ever a case later on against Pike for his role in this whole, subterfuge about her origins, then there won't be a log entry where she's actually saying, "Yep, he planned on backing me up. Can't plead ignorance." Right. So I think that was
very felt very in the pale moonlight.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Sort of,
But I thought this episode felt more like a TOS to me. It felt much like that storytelling that they had then. Not the same. There was distinct differences, and I like the pacing of it. That's what it felt original series to me. But and I like the way the storm, like this highly energized storm, seemed to be scouring and carving and destroying things in this path. Like it was just like raking across the land and burning out anything that was there, leaving just this white floaty powder behind. It was very visually quite stunning. So I liked that. What I understand what you're saying about superfluous kind of dialogue, and I would agree that in some contexts it does seem that way. But overall, I think they did a really good job with this particular episode and how they told the story.
I really loved Pike confronting Spock at his pace of reading. Like, can you skip to the end?
Yeah.
In keeping with having to look at all Trek properties through the lens of the areas in which they are created, with the push for greater equality, representation, and diversity, does Strange New Worlds have equal gender representation? I think it's a little hard to know, because unless we assume everybody is cis, we don't know what the landscape is. To me,
Yeah, that's my question, and I fully acknowledge that there's a non-binary spectrum, right? A gender fluid spectrum that we could be referring to, but in the context of the first 3 episodes, I see a lot of women and a lot of what could be non-binary people on the crew. I don't see a lot of clearly defined men, masculine, male figures. I've seen a few fleeting ones, and even so, even just moving aside from the gender aspect, those people on the crew seem like waifs compared to Pike and Spock. Right? They're not very many big boned, powerful people, muscular people, heavier people on the crew, and I would just wonder if there's something missing from if we're considering this notion of representation and diversity and infinite combination. Right now, to me, it strikes me as a very not a very balanced property just yet, and maybe that pops up later. But aside from Pike and Mabenga and Spock and Hammer and one or two unnamed characters, most of the other people that we've seen, and Kyle, most of the other characters that inhabit the spaces, like the bridge crew, most of the people that you're seeing in the hallways, they don't appear as they're not a lot of men represented. So that was just my observation.
I think that I agree with that there's more like women on the bridge, but I question whether that is of importance, basically. And I was thinking as well, like off the triumvirate, basically, that's key to the premise of the show. Like 2 out of 3 are male, and also like the reason basically that I question if it is of importance is it more important to have an equal representation, or is it more important to have perhaps more realistic? Because like I was pretty sure in thinking that the population of Earth as it stands consists more of women as we know it, and isn't perhaps a realistic extrapolation of that perhaps there may be more women in the sort of galaxy-wide federation also.
Well, I'm completely I'm completely open to having conversation about, is it a matter of having the best people, and the best people could be out of any class of candidacy, could be women, or could be non-binary, or could be from a variety of the across the spectrum.
Right.
But
like in TOS, the bridge was mainly men, even when there was something going wrong. It was really funny how I would think naturally Uhura would take over if certain people weren't on the bridge, but then some guy from engineering would come up and take over. So I thought like in TOS it was mainly men, because in the 60s they didn't believe that certain women would have the ability. They were inferior and wouldn't have positions. That's why Una only lasted 1 episode in TOS. So I would think that this is more of like a product of meritocracy, where
and Steven said that Pike has a problem with or an issue with women being on the bridge in the cage.
But my point really is that if we look at TOS and all throughout the properties that have been developed since, right, there was initially a push to have more women present because of, let's have some equality here. And then it became, let's make sure it's just not women on the bridge with their, mini skirts and, the yeoman. Let's give them roles. Let's make them important characters. That's why Uhura was so important, iconic for the, but even she was relegated to kind of secondary character status. So it was about better representation, and better roles for women, so that they could be appear to be equal in the creation of this universe, right? But if equality between genders, and I'm not talking about identity now, and I'm not talking about ethnicity, but if there's an issue about equality amongst the genders, then once we have attained a higher awareness about gender representation, then shouldn't there also be an effort to make sure that there's gender representation, balanced gender representation, instead of, well, there's a lot more women now, and that's just how it is. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. We just have to accept it. People in the past didn't accept it when it was a lot more men. So if we're truly trying to get to equality, then we need to be mindful about how it might appear to not just one segment, but to all people. And I fully understand that maybe there's an intent there to reduce kind of gender identity, or maybe make it a secondary issue. Okay, I get that. And maybe it is best candidates, happen to be women. But at some point, you're gonna have people like from maybe my generation who are going, wow, Pike's on a bridge with all these girls, all these women. That's amazing. I
don't think the Federation's in danger of matriarchy, like patriarchy or something.
Oh no. But I just think that in our current time, these are issues, right? Equality amongst the genders, equality amongst people of different identities and different ethnicities. These are all things to be still wrestled with. And as first couple of episodes, I just don't see the gender equality.
Sorry, you reminded me, like, if you're talking about the Federation at large, how it's depicted in Strange New Worlds, you've also obviously got the boss of Pike, April, is a guy.
Yeah, we can get into power and authority and those things too. I'm just talking about representation on the screen for the episodes. That's all.
As a fellow screenplay writer, when I write characters, I don't worry about representation. I don't worry about checking boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I let the story tell me where it wants to go. So, all due respect to people who want to have a certain number of representation in Star Trek, but I believe that as a writer, you tell the best story that you possibly can. The minute that you start focusing on representing everyone in your story, whatever your story could be or is, I think that's where you make a critical mistake as a storyteller. Like if you create a character just to represent a specific group of people, that's where you make a mistake. Make the character because the character is key to the story that you want to tell. Don't create a character or don't put a character in a series just to check a box. That's the fact that Pike is surrounded by lovely and beautiful women don't really bother me at all. But I do want to say that the friend of mine who I'm watching the series with pointed that out, and she's a female, and she pointed out, she's like, "Where are the men at? There are a lot of women on this show. Where are the men? I want to see some more men." So I was
no. I mean, I can't be the only one.
Yeah, it's like
So did we need all three reveals that came in this episode at once, or would it have been better story structure wise to put them in different episodes?
And those reveals were?
The reveals were La'an revealing that she is a descendant of Khan. I'm not sure how they wouldn't have known that already.
Mm-hmm. Getting her to admit it, right? That's
right. That Una is Illyrian, and of course Mabenga's daughter, whose pattern is in the pattern buffer. Could that have been delegated to other episodes? I think the last one absolutely. The La'an being Khan's descendant. Again, I have no idea how people wouldn't have been aware of that already. Obviously, when she was growing up, people were aware and ostracized her for it.
There was some dovetailing there with the Illyrian story, so I think that's why it came out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, I really love the focus on Una in this episode and understanding her, and even though I had issues with like the Mbenga story being sort of tacked on at the end, I really enjoyed sort of the camera just following Una and watching the wheels turn in terms of her decision making with certain things, because like one thing's been sort of mysterious about her, like how does she arrive at the decisions that she makes, um and she seems very like take the bull by the horns. And I loved the scene where she takes Hammer and puts him over her shoulder, where it's clear that obviously there's something different about her.
Well, it's to me, it seemed quite evident and obvious that there was something different about number one and Una since the cage, and I'm glad that they finally like established that so firmly. But also, I think like they had a few things to sort of get out of the way. I think in regards to like basically the premise of the show, that like who Laan and Una actually are, which I think they could have established. I think Laan, at least like in the first episode, which he talks about like her colony ship and stuff like that, the Puget Sound. But it doesn't really bother me. I think like later episodes have other stories to tell.
I do think that there's the two stories that I could have done without in this episode are the story about Laan talking about her lineage. I thought that could have been just thrown out with the bathwater. Um, and also I do think that the whole thing with Abenga having a daughter in the pattern buffer could have deserved its own standalone episode. I really would have wanted, if you're going to do that, give it its own proper episode. And I don't understand why the writers didn't do that, because I think that the Strange New Worlds writing team is basically going to give us Michael Piller style 90s Star Trek, where every week we're going to focus on one main character in the show. So why don't you just take the Mbenga stuff and move it over to his episode that I think we're going to get? I may be wrong, but I think we're going to get it at this point. But other than that, I really like. Sorry, this isn't really answering the question that you posed, but I really like the future exploration of the relationship between number one and Laan. I really like that, and I specifically like the last scene that they have in sort of their version of 10 Forward. And the conversation, that the very quick conversation that they have while they're eating strawberries. I really like that.
Yeah, I don't think they needed all three reveals. I think they could have done it differently. That being said, I didn't really mind it. I thought that the two of them dovetailed well, and the element with the doctor and his daughter didn't really unsettle me all that much. I do agree that should be they should revisit that, I think, in order to flesh out that story a little bit, because you've got a kid who's lost in computer space, waiting to be rematerialized. There's some substance there that can really be fleshed out. But yeah, I didn't mind all three being together, although they could have made a different choice for sure. I can recognize that.
I think also like this is in quite a few reviews. I think it have been this has been like referred to as like an analogy of a coming out story. I thought like Robert Meyer Burnett talking about that. He read a review and he was saying, he was criticizing it because he took it completely literally and saying like, oh, why in modern Star Trek do they always need to have a coming out story regarding homosexuality? But that obviously, now that we've seen the episode, is nothing, like how it's portrayed. It's an analogy, like in the sort of tradition of TOS.
Yeah, and I think that we've been. I think the backlash and these kinds of Discovery gave us relationships between same gendered people. You got men with men, women with women, and a variety of people on the spectrum, which is great. It's fantastic to see love is love is love, right? And affection is affection is affection. It's almost like a backlash now that when we see in Star Trek, which is very popular, property right now, when you see two characters, say female characters, in an intimate kind of moment, the automatic assumption is that they must be developing feelings for each other, and this is going to become a relationship. Why can't it just be friends, right? So we're just shifting now. We're always thinking that this is where they're going, when it doesn't have to go that way.
Yeah, I think that's a bit similar to like what's happened on Doctor Who, where like they had like Rose and the Doctor, and
Right.
different companions have be romantically linked, and then some people are saying like, why do they have to be? Surely they can just be friends. Likewise,
Because there is something to be said for platonic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's funny observation, since the entire series starts with Pike in bed with somebody.
True, right? But that doesn't mean when he's having these little moments with number one. I don't know if you guys caught it, but he gives her back her badge, right? She doesn't take the badge, just takes it from him. She touches. Go rewatch that moment. Her fingers linger on his fingers and thumb as she takes the badge from his hand, and that true. It's a little detail that didn't have to, doesn't mean anything perhaps, but maybe it does. Maybe. I mean, it's just these things that are making us think that there's more to something. It could just be two people respecting each other and working together really well in a partnership that's non-sexual. Why the hell not?
But also, like, these sort of moments are, they lead so much and have done for decades to like fan fiction stories where like the Kirk.
Don't get me started with Kirk
romances.
Spock. Yeah, let's not get it. Let's not go there.
Really? Do we have to go there? Let's not.
I mean,
I'm just saying
there's lots of them.
I'm just saying
Sulu
it can
and
inspire.
Chekhov and-
Yeah, there are lots of it, exactly, and it can inspire fans. That's my point.
Yes, inspire. That's a good word for it. Inspire fans. That's
Yeah,
good. That's a good
queer
euphemism.
coding came before representation, and for folks, for the longest time, have never seen their own type of relationship being represented on TV. So, and I'm glad that we've sort of moved past that, where we actually just have queer relationships rather than having to sort of like read into things, or have something like with Garrick and Bashir where they're just sort of like
Right.
tense,
The innuendo or the subtlety.
yeah. Mm-hmm. How and this sort of goes back to the question about regarding like representation. How about why everyone aside from Pike, number one, Spock seemed like stick thin wilting flowers who would blow away in a stiff breeze? Where are the strong muscular types? Where are the heavy set? Not very diverse. Aside from Prodigy, the character in Prodigy, and Tilly, I would agree. I would agree with, there's just a lack of diversity in body types. There's no reason why we can't have different shaped characters here. Absolutely none.
Yeah. Again, that was my question, and those are the observations that I've been making, right? Because the era that we live in right now is so rich with discussion about diversity and inclusivity, and why is it that everyone kind of, except for the hair, right? I mean, there's a little bit of variety with the hair, but these. I mean, I honestly, I don't buy drummer. I mean, Leon, right, in her fight with number one, security chief. I don't buy it, and there's so many other things that I just wonder if Klingon suddenly materialized in the bridge of the ship, who's gonna fight? You know, who's gonna
So, like,
beat up
you
on a
would think
Klingon?
he would be.
My money is on Hammer. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But he's conveniently in engineering, not the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, but in her defense, you never know. I mean, La'an was dealing with number one, who is enhanced. So, but we haven't seen La'an in a drag out fight like with the Klingons. So I'm very interested to see, because we do know that the Klingons are coming eventually in the series. So it'll be interesting to see what she does when the Enterprise has a situation where an alien species boards the ship and she has to necessarily fight.
Yeah. But Marcelo, come on, you saw that fight that they had.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I saw
it was. I mean, it looked.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
come on.
I don't think I could disagree with you more. Sorry.
You like the fight, Dan?
Hold up.
Absolutely. I think it's the main highlight of this episode.
Hold up. I just want to back up a little bit. I am speaking with a little bias because I like the character so much, and the only reason I like the fight is because I like the characters, the two characters. So the two characters are my favorite on the show, but I do understand where you're coming from, where it really doesn't work, because La'an is sort of skinny, and she seems like she would get thrown around in a fight with a bigger adversary. So, yeah.
It just looked and Dan, you're gonna disagree with me, and I get that, but the fight looked sloppy. The fight looked like it wasn't between two battle-hardened, trained
people,
Starfleet officers.
One of them was also impaired by an illness as well. So, and also I would think like Una was more playing it to the defensive. She was really just trying to get her away from that panel. It wasn't really like trying to,
Yeah, but she had the presence of mind to talk about her backstory. I mean,
I don't really understand the criticism of the fight whatsoever. To me, they're clearly two women who have enhanced strength, right? And to me, it reminds me also of how many years Spock was portrayed as, on the original series and stuff like that, as not obviously as muscular as the character that Vizasa spoke about in Prodigy, and yet having super strength and the sequence. It reminds me of the sequence in Into Darkness where Khan and Spock are fighting, and likewise both of them have super strength, and yet they're not they're not overly muscular or whatever.
Well, it wasn't about muscularity there. It was a comment about that as a person of the actress is short of stature. So, because she's smaller, she's a little bit smaller, you'd expect that the fighting skills would be more enhanced, more valuable. And the fight that we saw depicted didn't seem to convey that to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm criticizing it from my perspective, not from everyone's perspective. I'm not saying everyone should believe this. To me, it wasn't believable the way it was portrayed. That's all.
And to me, it was.
That's fair enough. Differences.
Yep.
Have a little that's the questions. Did anybody have any sort of final thoughts that they wanted to share?
We'll still do rank pips.
Oh, pips. That's right. So how many pips would you give this episode?
5.
Personally, I would give it a 4 because I love the focus on Una and her backstory. I'm so excited that we get to know more about this mysterious character. I loved the sort of back and forth between Pike and Spock on the surface of the planet, and a little bit more backstory of the Illyrians and the genetic sort of the way that they approach genetic engineering as a way to adapt to their surroundings rather than having their surroundings adapt to them. I thought that was really interesting. Solid 4 for me.
I would have to give it a 4 as well. This this is my favorite episode of the series so far. Granted, we're only 3 episodes in, but I found this episode to be endlessly entertaining. And despite my little small issues that I had here and there, I thought that this episode was quite wonderful. But my favorite aspect of this episode was the stuff with Una covering up her secret from everybody, and I love the backstory of the Illyrian people and what ended up happening to them as a result of them wanting to become members of the Federation.
And that's kind of what I was lamenting about in the last episode, not knowing enough about the shepherds and their backstory. This time we knew about the Illyrians. We saw, right? This whole episode is about exploring them in relation to number one and her kind of secret. And this is really what it was, right? It's about living your true self. It was about being open and honest about who you are, just not only for everyone else's benefit, but for your own benefit, right? So there was some really nice elements that were very topical, very current in relation to the storytelling. I would give it a strong 4 as well. I liked a lot of it, and of course, these little tiny things that I'm pointing out that bothered me. It doesn't really take away from the storytelling that they're unfolding before us episode by episode. It's just a general trend that I'm just observing about gender, and there's a general trend that I'm observing about the type of characters or actors that are being cast and how they're being depicted, the characters on the screen, and leads me to wonder, would they be able to fight off a Klingon Batleth attack and things like that. So a solid 4. The only thing I wish I'd seen differently would be when Spock and Pike had to face the ion storm and they were being protected by the entities. I would have loved to see them spoon instead of holding on to each other and screaming just I don't know who would have been doing the spoon, who was the spoonee, but that's just a little something.
I could have lived without that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Dan, how about you? What were your tips?
Yeah. Pippi.
So I'd give it a 3. During this discussion, I've been thinking, would I give it a 4? I wish I could give it a 3.5, but you don't get a half a pip.
Well, you can get a half.
You can. You can get.
Can you?
Yeah. You can get a pip that looks like a.
Commit, Dan.
Yeah,
just commit.
Yeah, I'll give it a 3. I think, like Brad, you were saying, we know the backstory of the Illyrians, but it occurred to me, when you were saying that I'm a bit frustrated that it isn't outlined why they look so different from the Illyrians and Enterprise that have head ridges. I wish that would have been more firmly stated in this episode, but even then you could say well, that's due to their genetic engineering or whatever, but it's still I wish it had been stated. But there are lots of elements in this episode that I do enjoy and do like. So yeah.
Dan, you say that. I know we're trying to wrap up here, but you mentioned that. Is it possible that number one went through some cosmetic alterations, some genetically cosmetic alterations? Because they did talk about that in the first episode, right? Nurse Chapel. She's some kind of genetic specialist, right? She's introducing something that's doing a crash course on the genome, or forcing the body to make these cosmetic or physiological changes. So that's something that I guess I'm a little confused by, because if they're against genetic modification, but they're not against doing these things that alter the body physiologically.
Well, one thing that I was meaning to say that I forgot to say was I prefer the first 2 episodes to this one.
First 2 episodes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're stronger.
Okay.
All right. Well, there's nothing wrong with little contrarianism. I mean, it's all good. It's all good. We're unique. We're individuals. We have diversity in our beliefs.
Infinite combinations.
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks to the panelists for joining this discussion. We hope you, our viewers, have enjoyed it as well. Let us know in the comments section what you thought about this episode of Strange New Worlds. Please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we'll see you in the next time. Shout out to all the official Pike hairdo fanatics. Trekulator.